for having me. So yeah, I'm not sure about the party bit, but we'll talk about the effectively the launch. It's a little bit behind the date, but the intent for this was unfortunately going to have me for both sessions. So I'll try and make this useful, if not interesting, but I'll do my best on the interesting side. What I thought we'd do is the first half, so up until pizza, I thought we'd look at the tooling. And so I'm sure some of you are already using some of this tooling, but actually we've recently kind of relaunched it, rebranded it as Azure DevOps. So I want to talk about what and why and what the implications of that are. And then also, as well as slides, I want to show you some stuff. So we'll dive into it. And I also want to show you a really easy way of setting up Azure DevOps pipelines as well. So that's kind of the more of a tooling-y bit to begin with. And then after the break, I thought the second session, what I suggested was Microsoft has been on the journey first through Agile and secondly into DevOps for a number of years now. And I thought it might be interesting to relay some of our learnings from that journey. So it's not dogmatic, it's not that what we've learned is necessarily applicable to you at all, but just some of the high-level things that we've found. And so the second session will be more sort of processy, organisational findings, that kind of thing. That's the structure anyway. So very happy to make this informal, so shout if you've got questions, anything like that. If I'm not explaining something, just nudge me, all the rest of it. Other than that, I'll sort of kick off. So Giles Davies, I work for Microsoft in the UK. I'm an Azure technical specialist, and so my area is around Azure application development, and that includes Azure DevOps as well as sort of cloud native stuff like containers and serverless and those sort of areas. But Azure DevOps is one of those areas. The slides, by the way, if you want them, so they're at Crafty Coders, so aka.ms, CC Azure DevOps 1 and Azure DevOps 2. CC Azure DevOps 1 and CC Azure DevOps 2. So there's a couple of links in there and other stuff, but if you want those, you're more welcome to grab them. Any problems getting hold of them, if you've got any questions or anything, then get in touch with me, and I'll very happily help in whatever way I can. Just leave that up a second, so let's see a few cameras out. So I thought, well, we'll start, since we got DevOps in the title, let's just start there, we'll come back to the tooling. So there is no single, agreed definition of DevOps. So the one you'll very often see from Microsoft is this one. And it happens to come from one of our program managers, but I think it sets the context for what we're trying to do really with the tooling. So it's DevOps, the union of people, process and products. So key point there for me really being, we'll explore this more in the second session, is that DevOps is one of those areas where you can have the tooling, and in fact you need to have tooling because you need automation, but if you only have the tooling you won't necessarily get there. So there are other things you need to do beyond just having the automation and the tooling. So it's like most things, like most processes, it involves people and process as well as tools. And then the other part here is the continuous delivery of value to your end users. And the context that I would typically put that in is, you don't have to be, but very often DevOps is something that follows on from adoption of Agile. And so if we're looking at Agile, typically we're looking at Scrum or a Scrum-like process. And so there, I'm sure you're pretty familiar with this, but we're prioritising things on the product backlog, we're committing to those in the sprint backlog, we're working through those through our sprint preparation, and we end up with our potentially shippable product increment. And I think where we're typically seeing DevOps at a simple level coming in is to say, well actually at that point, we as a team have put a lot of effort into creating this potentially shippable product increment, so we've delivered value. And the potential fallacy there is that actually we've done great stuff, but it's not value. What it is potential value. Because until it's in the hands of the people who are meant to be using it, and they are getting value out of it, we haven't delivered that. And so for me, that's kind of where I see DevOps fitting in, is on the back of and building on Agile to say, how do we close that last step, which is to make sure that we can go from, we've put a lot of effort into doing something, we've got some potentially shippable product stuff, let's actually get it used and get people using that value. And that's kind of where I would position DevOps into that piece. A bit of marketing blurb, but just in terms of I think it's always important to say why would anyone care, particularly from a business point of view. Really about business agility. So we want to get stuff out there quicker, and generally speaking, whatever organisation I speak to, however frequently you release now, you want to release more frequently. That tends to be the general trend. And coinciding with that really is we want to look at moving from big, infrequent, scary, monolithic releases, which, worst case is, I guess, if you like, is where it's so big and scary that it becomes a sort of self-perpetuating, and we don't do a release for 6 months because we're so scared about it. And then when we do that big release, we release everything, and if it goes wrong, it's catastrophic. Everything is dead, and the whole thing's very stressful. We want to move from that world, which most people aren't in now, but we want to move from that extreme. The other extreme we'd like to get to is really microservices, where we have lots and lots of independently deliverable and deployable services, each one of which is low risk. We can roll back very easily if there is a problem, and which we can update and deploy independently of each other. So we don't all have to have the same release cycle. If part of what we're doing is pretty static, it can stay there. The thing that we are iterating over rapidly, we can update rapidly. So there are those sort of trends sitting around that as well. From an all-up Microsoft perspective, this really Azure fits into this story. DevOps doesn't have to go with the cloud by any means. You can use DevOps to deploy on-premise, so the two don't have to go together. But the cloud and DevOps do fit together very nicely, and I think I'll try and show you some examples in a bit as well. I think good examples around that would be, in particular, things like non-production environments, actually, test environments and so on. The ability to provision them, deploy to them, test, tear them down again really quickly. That takes advantage of the cloud and not having to wait for the sort of the on-premises processes. So alongside that, from an Azure perspective, obviously there's a lot of capability, all the different compute models in Azure, whether you're looking at infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, serverless, whatever, and we try and be as open as possible about that. Whatever kind of app, whatever technology you want, we'll support that on Azure, and the same is true for the tooling. So, just in terms of general scene setting, and we'll come back to what we've got in the tooling, but the key practices we're really looking at to wanting to support around DevOps are these. So continuous integration, which I'm sure a lot of people will be doing for a long time, prior to DevOps arriving on the scene. So continuous integration, all about really avoiding integration hell. So how can we make sure that we have a higher degree of confidence that we are, when we bring our code back together in a team, that it actually works, so it compiles, unit tests, all the rest of it. But the relevance really for DevOps is unless we can build independently on a build machine with confidence, then we can't think about deploying automatically. So we have to be able to do that build first, whether it's actually continuous integration or just an automated build or whatever, but we need to be able to do an independent automated build before we can think about deployment. Continuous deployment is then about how do we take what has been built and promote that across our environments up to and including production. And then layered across that, how do we give the ability to support things like approvals and governance. So particularly the closer you get to production, typically there are people or groups that want to have approval status over that. So how do we support that? I'll talk about infrastructure as code as well, that comes into that very strongly, I think. And then the other piece is that DevOps shouldn't necessarily stop at production, but when you've got stuff in production, how is it being used and how can that drive our adoption? How will that drive what's in our product backlog actually? So we'll see what people are doing and we need to make changes. I'll talk more about that in the second session, about how we do, we've moved to a kind of hypothesis-driven development around this and how we look at what people want to do. So let's go back to the tooling. So the tooling we're talking about is what's now called Azure DevOps. So I'll do a little bit of history on that. So for those of you, I know somebody already has mentioned things like Team Foundation Server. So just in terms of Microsoft technologies, the history of this, and for those of you who are perhaps closer to this tool, this is the fourth renaming of the tool, so good job on the marketing department. So the reason for that to some extent is, and a little bit of history if you're not aware, is that when Azure was young and sparkly-eyed, internally Microsoft was looking around and said, what we'd like to do is find an application, a Microsoft application that has millions of lines of code and a heavy dependency on SQL Server, and we'd like to see how hard it is to make it a cloud service, take it from on-premise to the cloud, to Azure. The finger was pointed at Team Foundation Server, which fit that bill nicely. The answer, by the way, was it wasn't too bad. It was fairly straightforward. There was some stuff that needed doing, but not too much. And the first evolution of that was Team Foundation Service Preview, which was the TFS running in Azure. The ethos from that point, and still is today, is that it's a single code base. So it's one code base that's shared between Team Foundation Server and what's now called Azure DevOps. It's really a question of where are you deploying it. Do you want to deploy it yourself, wherever? It doesn't have to be on-premise, it could be in the cloud, but do you want to deploy it yourself, in which case it's Team Foundation Server, or would you like it to be provisioned as a service, in which case it's what we're now calling Azure DevOps. We then changed the name to Visual Studio Online, which I think was the worst name ever, mainly because what it wasn't was Visual Studio Online, so that caused no end of confusion. So it did then change to Visual Studio Team Services. You won't be able to see it. This is my Visual Studio Team Services t-shirt. I'm not an Azure DevOps one. That wasn't a bad name, but the real reason for the name change to Azure DevOps is that for a long time, what was VSTS or Azure DevOps, we want to support genuinely anybody, so it doesn't matter what programming language, what framework you're using, what you're deploying to, and the Visual Studio bit of the name was a real double-edged sword. So for Visual Studio developers, it's a really well-known brand, and that's great. For non-Visual Studio developers, actually, it's also a really well-known brand, and you kind of think, well, why am I using that? I'm using Eclipse or IntelliJ or whatever, something else. Why would I be using a Visual Studio tool? So it was to try and break that association. But the other thing we're trying to represent here is it's also not just a rebranding, but we've also broken up the kind of monolithic VSTS into 5 distinct services. So for those of you that were using VSTS, you won't see the difference, it doesn't stop you doing anything, but actually you can now choose which of these 5 services you want to use. So Azure DevOps, so if I give it the right name actually, so really it's Azure DevOps Service or Services, and the next version of Team Foundation Server will be called Azure DevOps Server. So that's kind of where the name goes. And it's broken down into 5 areas. So Azure Boards is all of the work item tracking and managing. So that's things like Kanban boards, support for Agile and Scrum, work item tracking, queries, dashboards, all that kind of stuff. Azure Repos is the source code repositories, and you've got the choice between Git and Team Foundation version control. So again, a little bit of history on that. Until we introduced Git, which was like 2013, somewhere around there I think, so a while ago, but we didn't have a name for source control in TFS. It was a concurrent system, so sort of a client-server based system, a bit like CVS or Subversion or anything like those. When we introduced Git support, we needed a name for the other version, so it's called Team Foundation Version Control. My preference actually is, because we're not trying to support multiple source control tools, is I think we should just call it distributed and centralized, something like that. And then we have chosen to use Git as the implementation of distributed, and we've chosen to use Team Foundation Version Control for the implementation of centralized. But you can have both in the same project, so you can have one TFVC repository or multiple Git repositories, whichever combination suits you. I think increasingly we're seeing Git is the repository of choice, but you have that choice there. Azure Artifacts, which was an extension for a while, and that basically gives you the ability to have private dependency management feeds. So you have private NuGet, NPM, Maven, and we've recently introduced something called Universal Artifacts. So not really for software, but perhaps I want to share other things, documents or other assets. So Artifacts is about that side of it. Pipelines, it provides the build and release pipelines, the CI/CD bit, which we'll look at a bit more. And then Azure Test Plans provides test management tools and manual exploratory testing tools. So they were all there in VSTS. They've been broken down into these explicit areas. And I'll talk about some of the other changes there, but effectively you can choose which of those you want to have, and you don't have to use them all. And the idea with this was to have greater openness, so you could say, actually I will choose to use something else instead of boards, but I do want to use pipelines and artifacts, for example, or whatever combination. So that's the intent of that, of breaking it out. Again, it'll be in the slides. If you want to know more about just sort of the background to why we made the name change and some of those details, there was a good blog post at launch that's there, so that's the link to that, so have a look at that. If you are, how many of you are VSTS customers already, or users as at the time? So for those of you that were, just a few things I'll point out. Most obvious thing is that the URL changes or can change. So you'd access VSTS by saying you go to the URL, which is my.org, so my prefix, whatever, .visualstudio.com, and that's now changed to dev.azure.com/my.org. So you don't have to do that. That's there. I think I'll put it down here. The redirects will be in there indefinitely at the moment, but that's probably the most obvious thing you'll immediately see. If you create a new account, you will automatically have a new URL, so you'll only have that new one. And you can go into the project, the organisation settings, and say, actually, I want to enforce that new URL format, if you want to deliberately move away from that. I mentioned you can sort of pick and choose between those 5 services and say, in this project, I don't want to see any of boards, repos, test plans, pipelines, artifacts, etc., and all of that kind of thing. New branding, all the rest of it. In terms of things like pricing, there's no fundamental change in the pricing. The only real change, which is a good one, is that for the hosted pipelines, so the build and release pipelines, the number of minutes you can use for free has gone up from 240 to 1,800. So quite a substantial increase in the number of free minutes. So the only changes there really are a good one that you'll see. And you can also, just that point about you can use the services independently really, so I'll talk about that a little bit more. Other one is if you're working on open source projects, then I've just celebrated, as in I went to the post of our internal post room and picked up a huge crystal that they send you. I've just celebrated my 10-year anniversary at Microsoft, and the time I've been there, it's been really, really massive change, genuine deep change in a lot of areas. One of those areas around open source. So it was, when I joined, it was very much the case that everything in all areas were there to support Windows, and nothing else could be considered or would be tolerated really. That's 100% turned around, and if there's a suitable open source alternative or a solution out there, we'll just adopt it. Git is a good example that we talked about already. So it's not a Microsoft version of Git, let's just adopt it and contribute back. More broadly, and this is sort of an example, it's true in other areas, but if we look at the Azure DevOps tooling, we wanted to support open source developers more, or even more. And so if you are developing an open source project, you have unlimited build minutes for public projects, and you also get 10 free concurrent agents, basically the pipelines. So you can have up to 10 builds and releases going concurrently. So we wanted open source projects to get access to this tooling very free for most of them. We've also, and this was an interesting one in that I found out just from actually listening to one of the podcasts from some of the team actually, but obviously we've acquired GitHub, but actually our integration with GitHub started before that acquisition process, and not as I'd expected. It was almost the process of working with GitHub and saying, how can we get some better integrations, was the catalyst to saying we should acquire them, rather than the other way around. It wasn't we're going to acquire them, now how do we integrate into them? It was, actually this is going really well, we're enjoying doing this integration work, we should think about buying them. And so one of those areas that you'll see is that if you're in GitHub, the Azure DevOps pipelines are now available within the GitHub marketplace. So you can just go and have a free pipeline from Azure DevOps, and you can just use it directly from within GitHub. So it's another way of trying to support open source projects within this. There are some early adopters there, if you like, of those of using Azure DevOps pipelines from GitHub. So our own Visual Studio Code team, but also like Python, Atom, those teams are using those as well. So that's being used there. So I thought, let's go and have a look. Let's look at some of this stuff. So a little bit of background on what's on that. I'll try and hold the mic and do stuff, so hope that's okay. For those of you, if anyone hasn't seen it, we'll go through and have a little look and an intro. Probably ought to put the goggles on. So this is, I'm in Azure DevOps. So I've got in fact, if I go up a step, let's go back. I've got access to a number of organisations. I'll show you some of the other ones later on. But you can, if you're not aware, you can create an Azure DevOps organisation for free. The account is free, and you can have 5 basic users for free. And then there's no charge for things like the size of a project or the number of projects or what's in source control or anything like that. The main charging mechanism is the users. And so it's a per user per month subscription, which it depends on various factors, but around £6 per month, that kind of level beyond those 5 free. So it's that kind of rate. So you can create one of these. Inside here, if we just go in and create a project, give it a name, doesn't really matter. And you'll notice actually a couple of things here is that you've got a choice now between public and private projects. So private projects are as you'd expect, they're only visible to those people that you specifically invite, and you've got the whole range of security permissions to apply. Public, basically you don't have to invite contributors, but they only have read-only access until you give them more. So you can give public read-only access to your repositories if you want to. And then you can choose between, as I mentioned already, do I want to use Git or Team Foundation version control? I'll choose Git. And then we've also got the concept of process templates. And so this is really just pre-bundled sets of customizations, principally around work items. So do you call a bug or a defect? What fields does it have? What are the values in those fields? Do we have product backlog items or user stories? All that kind of thing. And they're all bundled up in these, and you can create your own versions of those. So choose various options on that, go and create and get a new project. Should only take a few seconds. And then what I want to do, I'll just very quickly show you some of the boards area. So I might want to start, your starting point might be to invite people into the project, so groups or users. What I also want to do then is if I go into things like the boards, let's go into backlogs. Obviously I've got a brand new project here, so I've got nothing in here, but I can start off, again I'm going to do one-handed stuff so I'll keep it illegible on here. I can stick in product backlog items, so I've chosen the Scrum process template, so it's just called a product backlog item because you could choose to use a user story or a use case or whatever you want to do. You can move those around. And sitting underneath that is the work item. So the work item then, I'm sure you'll be familiar with this as a concept. You've then got things like assignment, state, descriptions, priorities, effort, whatever you want to put in there so you can complete these details, all the histories, links, all that kind of thing. So all of that's fairly similar. It's obviously had many updates over the years in terms of UI and things. We've also got the board equivalent, so you can, if you choose, and I think increasingly we're seeing most people prefer to work this way, then basically work in a Kanban board. So whether you choose to use it from a Kanban perspective is up to you, but I can do exactly the same things here. I can create things, I've got the cards, I can move those left to right, I can create extra columns, swim lanes, do all of that kind of stuff, so we can stick those things on there. And then I've got the ability to run queries, and if I go back into the overview, we can look at things like dashboards. So I can come into my dashboards, choose from a library of widgets. You can add to these yourself as well. And I could look at, say, obviously I haven't got anything at the moment, but I want to look at the cycle time for this project. Come in here and start to configure it, all that kind of stuff. So you can build up multiple dashboards, I would say kind of per audience, and work out what you want to show them, build up those views into your projects. What I wanted to look at was to dive into a simple example, particularly around the DevOps area. And so just to set the scene, is I wanted to, for those of you that are, I've chosen a .NET example, doesn't matter at all, it could be any language, and I'll show you an easy way of doing these. But for those of you that are .NET developers, you'll recognise this template. So I'm cheap, so I'm running this on a free tier this year. So it just takes a second, so it doesn't keep it running in the free tier, so there we go. You'll recognise the template, so just the MVC web app template. Highly customised in no different heading. But I thought what I'd do is just use this to walk you through some of the key parts of the flow, in particular things like continuous integration, continuous deployment, and show you how that kind of works. without worrying about what we're deploying too much. So this represents my dev environment. You probably can't see that, but I wouldn't do this in real life, but I've just distinguished that by putting dev on the end. So this is gd.mywebAppDev.azurewebsites.net, and obviously you'd have custom domains and all that kind of stuff. But what we'll do is let's just do something really simple. We'll change that heading, but I want to show you how we'll both then push the changes through using the tooling, but also go and create other environments on the back of that. So where I'm going to start is, we'll start off, again, doesn't matter. In my case, I'll just use Visual Studio, but there's no need to be doing that. And we'll make some simple changes. In fact, before I do that, I'm also going to link these to a work item. Now, in reality, and I'm a bit conscious of time, what I'll probably do here is start with a Kanban board, create a branch from the card in the board, bring the branch in, work on the branch, and then commit that back, and then submit those changes via a pull request, so that you can have code reviews and run policies and what have you. So I'm just going to skip that bit around the Git flow, if you like, just for time. But a sort of lightweight equivalent, I suppose, is what I'm going to come in here, is I'm just going to say that I want to relate this work item, which is updating the web app heading, to any changes that I'm about to make. I haven't made any yet, but whatever I do will be related to that work item. And so that will then give me the context. I can see what's in the build log, what's in the release log, and it will help me to answer questions like, have we deployed that user story into the QA environment, or something like that. So it gives me that useful context. So all I'm going to do is, let's come in here, let's go into find that heading, and then let's come in here, and let's just say, hello. I'm missing my other hand. Hello, after coders. There we go. But I'm not doing too much coding. And in fact, let's copy that. And then I've made that change. The other thing I want to do is I've got some automated functional tests in here. I've chosen to use Selenium. It doesn't matter what you use. And I've got some basic tests that just go and make sure the pages and things like when you create that template, it's got some email addresses and things on there. Make sure they're all there. One of those tests I've added in is just to check the heading. So I'll just make sure that's the same. So my expectation now is that this should work. So that was setting the scene for that one. So that's a hard day's deving done. So before I head off to the pub, I'm going to say that I've updated the heading. And I won't bother with sort of staging it and then committing later. I'm just going to do a commit all and push for now. So from that perspective, generally speaking, this should be fairly transparent to the developer, because what's then happening is happening in the background. And if I go back into Azure DevOps and I go to the project that's associated with that, which is my web app here, if I go into the repos, into pipelines, and if I go into builds, what we should see there is that I've got a continuous integration build that's underway. So what's happened here is that the build is connected to an agent, and those agents can either be hosted in Azure, so they're the ones we maintain for you, and they're Windows, Linux and Mac. So you can choose depending on what you need to build. It's probably worth just quickly mentioning, there are, like most things, pros and cons. So the pros of the hosted agents are that you're not responsible for them. You just use them, there are a pool of them. Completed. If I go and look at the summary, then we can see that I've got the output of the build, which we usually call the drop. But so whatever it is this has produced. I've added in a few other bits, so we can see that I've reached the giddy heights of 4% code coverage, so there's hardly any work to do there. 100% of my unit tests have passed. I think that's a great combination, but 100% test passed, hardly covered anything, but that's fine. Let's go back in there. We've got a few warnings that I need to look at, and I can see the association with that work item. But if I just go back and let's go and edit it so you can see just what it looks like inside the definition. We've got two views basically on this. So this is the, if you like, the original way of working with these pipelines, which is visual. So what you're doing is coming in here, saying I want to create a pipeline, and I add in a series of tasks from a library. And so there's a whole load of tasks that you can choose from. There's also a marketplace with thousands in that you can extend. And what that boils down to is saying, well, actually what I want to do is I want to carry out some build activities. whether that's to do anything to do with Microsoft technology or not. I might be using Ant or Maven or Gronk, anything like that. Bottom line for me actually is if you can script it, so if you've got batch script, command line, more likely PowerShell or shell script, which are in here, as long as you've got those, you can just go and add that in. So as long as it is scriptable, you can do it, is the bottom line, but look for an extension first. And look in the marketplace as well, see if somebody's done that. Build up the flow, and then this is the series of steps that you're going to carry out. Now, we've also introduced support for YAML as well, so you've got the choice about do I build this up visually and keep it in this visual representation, or do I have a YAML file that has the configuration? So that's in general availability for build. You can do that, and in fact, if you start off with the visual one, you can go and see the equivalent YAML for each of those steps. So you could start off visually, and then it's a bit clunky, but you can sort of copy and paste and bring that into the YAML if you want to do it that way, or you can just start with the YAML file and build it up. So those choices are there. A few things like triggers, so when is this going to be run? I've set it up as continuous integration. You can have scheduled. You can also chain them, so when another build is successful, this one gets kicked off. What I'm going to do is, if I go back to the builds, what we should see is, if I go back into the summary, just let that refresh a second. No, it's not there, let it build up in a second, let me just refresh that. There we go. Is I can also see the deployments. Let me try and zoom in a bit. So we can see there that what this is telling me is that the output of this build has been deployed to an environment. So in this case, it's been deployed successfully to my dev environment, and that it's not been deployed to QA. I'll talk about that in a minute, so why that's there. So if we go and have a look at that, we can go and find the release pipeline. We can see the same information here. If I dive into the view of that, then it will just essentially tell us the same thing. It's succeeded in dev. If we go and have a look at the logs, if we want to there, we can dive into these in more detail. We can see it's run through a series of steps, and we'll look at those in a second. But it's waiting on QA at the moment, and I'll come back to why. So the first thing I can do is I can go and check and see whether, if I just refresh my web app, there we go. So the new version of my web app has been deployed to my dev environment. If I go into the Azure portal, and I go into, I'm using PaaS, so Platform as a Service, App Services, then I can see I've just got my, if I refresh there, I've just got my dev environment. So what I'm going to do next is, if I go in here, it's paused because I've set it up to wait for an approval. So I'm burnt on this actually. Years ago, through Microsoft, I worked on a big project where we were very siloed between dev and test. And we did what in retrospect a disastrous release to test. First thing we got back was about 500 bugs, literally in about half an hour from the test team. Reason for that really was that almost every test started with go to this URL and log in, and every single one failed. What we deployed just didn't even run. It wasn't up and running. So my view on that is actually probably quite nice, either as a post-approval or pre-approval here, just to make sure that what you've passed over to somebody else potentially is good enough for them to use. It's just basic smoke tests. Now, in fact, what I've done there is I have run some Selenium smoke tests as part of the dev build. So if I go in and let's go and have a look at how we built this up. Let's go in here. Then we can see that in a similar way, the tasks I've set out in dev are to come in, I'll come back to this in a minute, but I deploy my app into the environment, and then I'm going to run my tests that I've got, in this case some Selenium tests. But what I'm going to do here, if I go back, let's go back to this one, is I'm going to approve it for release into QA. So you get notifications, you can integrate those into Teams or Slack or whatever you want to do there. And I'm going to say I approve that, I'm going to say go, and we'll approve. You could defer that as well. You could say actually I'd like that release to go on this date and time, so do it overnight. We'll start looking at it tomorrow, something like that. In this case I'll say go ahead and do it immediately. And then what's going to happen there, again if I just go back here and refresh, you'll see I've got the one environment. What I want to do here is in the QA environment, if we go back in and look at what we've set up there, let's go back to the pipeline in here, then my first step here is to provision that test environment. So for me, this is where DevOps and the cloud really come together really well, because what do I want out of a test environment? Well, very often I want a nice, new, clean test environment. I don't want something that has unknown history, because we don't know what problems that's going to cause. I also want it now. I don't want to have to ask for it and wait and be given permission to create one and do all that kind of stuff. So what I want to do here is say, right now, I want a brand new, clean test environment, and I'm going to use infrastructure as code. So in Azure, the native way of doing that is ARM templates, Azure Resource Manager templates. And that's basically just a JSON file or files in which you can say, this is what I want. I want this mixture of maybe multiple virtual machines, PaaS services, storage, networks, whatever you want to do, give me that again, please. In this case, it's just a web application, so very straightforward. And what I've said here is create or update it. So if it doesn't exist, create it. If it did exist, then make sure it matches what I've defined in the JSON file. So that's really the approach there. And you can be prescriptive about that and say, if I did a complete deployment, it would mean if you find stuff out there running already that doesn't match the JSON file, get rid of it. So it has to match the ARM template exactly. You could also use other approaches, so Terraform is another key one. So there are, like those things, reasons why you might choose either. ARM is the native one. Terraform is good at cross-cloud. So if you've got a multi-cloud setup, then that's probably the way to go. Some people prefer Terraform just for the way the files are structured. Possibly fall into that camp a bit, but either is fine there. Having provisioned it, I then want to deploy my application into that environment. So I'm just using a task to say deploy that out into my environment, and then run my automated tests. And then the reason I've structured it like this way is just as kind of a talking point is, this is all automated. I want to provision it, I want to deploy to it, I want to run tests. When that's done, we've done, and at this point, of course, I could do things like, if I go into test, I could be running, load tests, for example, as well. So I could do other stuff, whatever I want to in this file. But basically, do everything you can in an automated way. And then I've put in what we call an agentless phase, and I've put in a manual intervention. So for me, this is bringing reality into it, which is that, and I'm happy to be corrected as well here, is that I've yet to meet an organisation where 100% of testing is automated. So the reality is that a great deal of testing still relies on manual testing of one degree or another. Now, it's not to say that isn't the aspiration to be automated, and that everyone should be more automated. That's fine, but there are reasons why people aren't. And that's usually down to skills, time, fragility of tests, that kind of thing. However, the more you can do, the better. But the reality is you probably also need to do manual tests. So how do we do that in an automated flow? Well, I drop in a manual intervention, and that basically is just a pause, like the approval, and it's just saying, actually stop there, wait for something to happen, and then when whoever you've specified in here, in this case me, says that's okay, carry on. So I think another example of that for me would be something like an air gap. If it is deliberately, physically impossible to deploy from here to there because there is no connection, because there's an air gap between two networks or something, that might well be a manual intervention. You go, I've stuck, swivel chair interface stuff, I've stuck it on a USB stick, I've put it over here, and it's ready to go, and now I can assume it's on the other network, something like that. So although they're not, I wouldn't set out to have manual steps, there are reasons, I think, why you might have them. If I go back into the portal for a second, we'll see how we're doing. I can see that I've now got a second environment. So that's my QA environment has now been created. And if I dive into that, just click on the URL, then I can see that I've now got a QA environment and a dev environment that are identical. So we've deployed this into a newly provisioned environment. So if I was to go back to here, then we can see that it's showing that I've got that pending intervention. So if I look at that, that's where it's saying do your manual testing. So I'm not going to go into all the test tools inside Azure DevOps, the manual test tools, but essentially this is where I can go, okay, blah, 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 do stuff, that's great, fantastic, testing over. So what I'm going to do here is say that's all good, and resume. And then what I've said after that, and for me this is kind of key, there's different ways you can do this. We said, okay, if we've done everything we can in an automated way, everything we can in a manual way, what do we want this for? So let's go and get rid of it. So my last step here, in this case I'm being really brutal, I'm just saying delete this resource group and everything within it. So just blow this test environment away. I don't want it hanging around because we don't want to reuse it, and I don't want to be paying for it. So particularly in the cloud, there's that obvious tenet is you pay for what you use, so don't pay for what you're not using. If you're not using this test environment, blow it away, don't care, I want a nice new clean one next time anyway. So you could be more delicate than that, you could script anything you want, but you could also do things like if it's VMs, just stop them, or things like that. You don't necessarily have to delete it, but you can go and bring that stuff down. So that will wear away doing that. Just give that a second, I might prod it along in my impatient way. Actually, while it's doing that, just give it a second, one thing I want to highlight, you may possibly spot it, but if I go to the marketplace and I look at extensions, one thing I talked about sort of how we want to be open. So interesting here possibly is that our tooling, so our Azure DevOps tooling, will support other clouds as well. So this one's got an interesting, very interesting little story behind it. So we started off developing the AWS integration. And then we went to Amazon actually and said, would you like to own this and maintain it? And they said yes. So that's one of those really weird, there are lots of ways in which the two companies don't get on, but this is one place where we do. So we're saying actually, yeah, you can maintain those extensions. So again, from our perspective, although we have a very vested interest in our customers adopting Azure, we don't want the tooling that we provide to make that mandatory. Either because you've got a multi-cloud strategy, or because you want to use the tools but don't want to target Azure, we want to make sure that's fine. So go to the extensions marketplace and look for whatever integrations you're looking for. You should see those there. If I come back in here, okay, that's fine. So if I come back in, go back to my app services and refresh, we can see my QA environment is gone. And if I go back to my QA page and refresh, then that's gone. So I won't continue out through the other environments. You can see if I go back to the pipeline that I then fork out to two UAT environments. If they're successful, join back into pre-prod and then onto a production environment with approvals and stuff like that. So I won't subject you to all of that, but hopefully just so you get a sense of what we're trying to achieve with the tooling. Build it using things like CI. Having built it, promote that release across environments with things like approvals across the top of it. Now, the last thing I kind of wanted to show you for this part of it was I wanted to show you a really easy way of getting that set up. So you will, you can come in here. The way I created these actually came in here, did things like said, I would like to have a new release pipeline. Choose a template or not, whatever you want to do. This is something like that, and then you can start to give it names, and you can start to come in here and build it up. And oops, if I can click, there we go. You can come in here and start to build up the tasks and so on. So you can do this manually if you like. What I wanted to show you is a really great set of tooling that allows you to do this much more easily. So in the Azure portal, you can go to what's called DevOps projects. And so this is relatively new. Let me just, sorry, two hands. Big enough hands to stretch across the keyboard there. So let's go in there and just make it a little bit bigger. So DevOps projects, this will create the Azure DevOps project for you, and it will create a first cut of the build and release pipeline. The way I would position this is I think it's a great tool for playing around with and saying, how would I do that? What would it look like and how would I set it up? Or as a starter, say, get me going, and then I'll go in and customize it. So you won't do this and have it finished. But you'll have something to get going with rather than just, what do I do now? So the flow on that is fairly straightforward, is what kind of technology am I using? So what language typically here? So .NET, Java, Python, Go, whatever it might be. So depending on what you choose, if I choose Java, you'll see that there are different frameworks that are supported. If I go back to .NET, then I can choose between the full .NET framework and .NET Core. Do I want a database, that kind of thing. If I was to choose .NET Core, for example, what do I want to deploy it to? And your choices here are, do I want to deploy it to a virtual machine? So that will be an Azure virtual machine into which I'll deploy my .NET Core application. Do I want to deploy it into platform as a service, so the app service like I've just done? And I can choose then whether I have a Windows or a Linux app service. do I want to containerize it? So do I want to turn it into a Docker container and then deploy that container into the app service? Or do I want to take a container and do I want to deploy that into a full container orchestrator? And if so, do I want to use Kubernetes or Service Fabric? So those are the kind of choices we're making. So if I then come in here and say, well, let's choose that one, actually, let's say Kubernetes. So I choose the Azure DevOps organization that I want to use for this. I give it a name, so if I say this is my Crafty Coders Kubernetes example. I'm going to create a new cluster, or I can choose to use an existing one. I can choose where I want that to be located, so let's just say Europe for the moment. I won't go through them all, but if you go into the additional settings, you can set up resource groups, choose the exact version of Kubernetes you want to install, how many nodes, what size those nodes are, all that kind of stuff. So be aware of the additional settings in there. There are defaults, but you can go and set those up. If I just say done, then what this is going to do is take, there's another option to use your own existing code, but by default here it's going to take a sample application, create an Azure DevOps project, import the code into the Git repository. It'll then create the continuous integration definition. It'll create a continuous deployment definition, the release pipeline that we saw, and then it will kick those off, and it will also provision the resources in Azure. So in this case, we'll have a Kubernetes cluster, an Azure container registry, and you'll see how to create a container, push it into the container registry, and then deploy that out into Kubernetes. So that whole process, which we won't wait for, will take about 15 minutes, of which about 13 minutes of it is creating the Kubernetes cluster. But pretty quickly, in fact, let's go and see if we can find it now. Let's go in here. I'll do. If I go back in here, trying to remember what I called it, so CC, here we go. There's the project that's just been created. If I go and look at the pipelines, we look at the builds, we can see that there is a build and it's already been kicked off. So the first build has been initiated. And if we go and have a look at what that build is doing, then we can see that it will put in a flow for us. So again, for me, this is about, I think it's a useful learning tool. So okay, if I step through those, that's showing me how to create a container registry. So the container registry for containers in Azure using an ARM template. So we'll treat it as infrastructure as code. You may or may not want to do that, but at least you can see how to do it. Then there's a task for building the image, and you'll be able to look at all the properties and settings and all the rest of it. Then after we built it, we want to push it to the container registry that we created here. And then because we're going to be deploying to Kubernetes, then a common approach to that is to use Helm charts as a packaging tool. So actually, let's go and create the Helm package that contains the container that we're getting from that container registry. And then let's go and publish those, so we've got that Helm chart to use. And if we go and look at the release pipeline, it'll just have one stage. So this will be an obvious, and for the build, no doubt you'll want to add in unit tests and all sorts of other stuff as well, which is why I don't think this is you choose these options and it's done, but it's a really good starting point. Similarly here, I probably want to start cloning this across and saying we don't just have a dev environment, we have other ones as well. But if I go and have a look inside that, and just zoom in so we can see it again, in the same way, that's then showing how we can use an ARM template to create a Kubernetes cluster. Again, that may or may not already be existing, so you may or may not want to do that. And then some configuration files using PowerShell, some data configuration. How to deploy to Kubernetes, basically, by using a Helm chart, which is what those steps are doing. So it's just showing you how to approach that. And also integrating, and somewhere in there with secrets, actually. One of these, I think, works with the secrets. But, so you can then just get a first pass of, okay, that's how I would use this to do these steps. So for me, I think that's a really, I'd almost say if there's anything you take away, I would say just be aware of the DevOps projects as a great way to get started, understand some of those options, choose your technology, your target environment, and see how it'll be done. From within here, this is like a home page that allow you to then jump into what I've just shown you. Things like the build pipelines, the Agile backlogs, all that kind of stuff that will be created in there. So, but I think those are really useful tools to get going on that. So I've got a couple of slides in there, on those in there as well, so some information on that. And then I'm just going to mention this now because I'll probably forget otherwise actually. I'll put it in the second one as well. But I'll sort of wrap up there, assuming it's nearly pizza time, somewhere around there, but I'll stop for questions and break and all the rest of it. If anyone's interested, we do a series of these actually, but just based on location, it's not too far away. Is we're doing a 2-day Azure App Dev hack in Derby, at Pride Park Stadium actually in March. So what we do with that is we put people into teams of 5, give them a Proctor, give them an Azure subscription, give them a scenario. You don't have to go for the scenario, you can do something you want to do if you want to. And then you've got 2 days to play around with stuff. It's not, we encourage people to use DevOps to support it, not necessarily our tooling, whatever tooling you want to use, that's not enforced. So it's sort of tangential to what we're talking about today slightly. But actually if you wanted a out of the office chance of getting together, you can come together as a team or as an individual, feel free to sign up for that, and we'll sort of we'll feed you and give you a subscription and give you 2 days to have a play around with it. So you can play around with that. So they're in the slides. So I think that's what I want to cover on that. My summary again is we've renamed to Azure DevOps, but the key part for me is that that's really there to support both the Agile part of your projects and also adopting DevOps. So it's those pipelines are the key part around DevOps in particular, and we want that to be really open. The other thing I didn't mention, I should cover off as well, is you may well have existing tools you're using. So you may well be using Jenkins or Octopus and Chef and Puppet and Ansible and Terraform and all sorts of things, and that's absolutely fine. So what we're not proposing here is rip and replace. What I would think of this as, if you want to standardise and simplify the range of tools you're using, then that's great, that's what we'd like it to be able to do for you. If, however, you've put investment in time and energy and you are successful with the use of other tools, then what we'd say is keep those. We're not trying to, if you're not getting paid from something, then leave it where it is if it's working. Think of this as like an orchestration engine. We have a lot of customers who use it that way. So when this happens, then that means the following tasks get run, and that might be delegate to something else, like you'll now delegate to Ansible and do something there, or whatever it might be. So don't think of this as a rip and replace, and it can be any mixture of I'll use just Azure DevOps, or I'll use it in conjunction with other tools that work for us. So that's really the kind of idea on that. So I will stop talking at you there for a second. If you weren't aware, there's some stickers and pens. Don't get too excited, but there are some stickers and pens by the Bulmers on the end of that table, so feel free to grab those in there. Any questions before we have a break, and then before we come next one? Yeah.
Just a quick one. When it's got migrated from Visual Studio Online to Azure DevOps, there must be a number of projects got migrated, and some of the functionalities are whether to have repository as private or public and stuff like that. What was the default setup at that point?
Yeah, so if you're migrating from the online service, actually, then you'll almost notice nothing except the branding change. There is a new UI, but things like a private project will continue to be private. It'll only be new projects that you have those options. I mean, you can go back and make a previously private project public, but the migration will be seamless, so you won't have noticed that. If you're moving from Team Foundation server on-premise to Azure DevOps, then there is a migration tool, and that's a slightly more involved process because you are migrating the data from on-premise into the cloud, but basically because it's software as a service, every time we do a release, and I'll talk more about that in the next session, how we do that, but actually that's our responsibility. And in reality, this we do a release every 3 weeks. We have a 3-week sprint. Every 3 weeks we do a release, and actually the concept of a major release has really gone away. So this was just another 3-weekly sprint. I'll talk about the use of feature flags and progressive deployment in the next session. But actually, from a user's perspective, that's it. It's our responsibility. Yeah, nothing involved in that. Cool. Okay. So let's start. Sorry, another.
I'll take the opportunity. So you were just talking about the openness of the platform.
Yeah.
So do you have a demonstrator where you can actually show us deployment to AWS and using Jenkins?
I've got some projects that use Jenkins, for example. I haven't got one set up that uses AWS, but absolutely, all of those quite possibly, totally. Yeah.
Is there something that you can sort of demo to us for a couple of minutes and just talk through?
Let's see, I can show you, let me see if I can just find the Jenkins one. For that one, actually, so I can't demo, but I'll show you the setup, because, well, I can't say I can't demo, just in time, because I've got a Jenkins VM that I run in Azure, which is not running at the moment, so I need to fire it up. But if I look at, let's go to, let's find my example. And then, confusingly, I created 2 projects stupidly with very similar names. It was good. I had a good reason at the time, and now I just need to. There we go. So I just remember which one it was. So I'll show you the one. There was, like most things, it made sense at the time, and now it doesn't. So if I go into, well, in fact, I think in this one, let me just check. Okay, I'll come back to this. Let me come in here. So this one is a Java project. If I go into the build flow for this one. So it's pretty straightforward, but I'm using Maven to build a Java project, and then same thing, creating the drop, in this case a jar file, a WAR file is being created out of this. The release, and now I'm, sorry, just bear with me. No, that's not the one I was thinking of. Bear with me, sorry, I think I got the wrong project. If I can't find it quickly, I'll look at it over the break and show you in a minute. Sorry, I've just realised, so what I'm looking for is the build. I've got one where the build delegates to Jenkins, basically. No, let me find it, I forgot which project it is. Okay, let me find, I'll show you quickly after the break. But yeah, so the example I wanted to show, and I've got one, is where the source code is actually in GitHub, so it's not sitting inside Azure repos. It's using Jenkins for the CI engine, and so what's happening here is it's using the workflow here to say when you commit to GitHub, it kicks off the build, but the build then immediately delegates to Jenkins. The Jenkins runs, and then we use our release to deploy the WAR file into it. So yeah, I don't have an AWS example. I'll try and find that one in a second. Sorry, I can't remember the name of it. But yeah, absolutely, all of that is perfectly possible. Cool. Okay, so let's have don't know how long it is, a break, and then we'll resume afterwards. So
I'll look at chat. Okay, so the piece is slightly delayed, it seems. Really sorry. So,
do you want me to carry on?
Well, I've got a few questions for you.
Okay.
As well. What we've got set up actually is the first time that we've done this is we've got some quite cool products which we've built. So if you want to have a chat with any of the guys at the back, then they can walk you through some of the stuff which we've done. As I said, it's the first time we've done this, so some of them are concerned that no one will talk to them, so please do. And the pizza will be here shortly. And if you can answer some more questions.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
I've got a question for you actually.
Sure, far away. Yeah.
So my question is, you showed us how you can essentially pause a build and wait for a user to do some testing and then resume it. We have private build agents, so they're running on virtual machines. Does that basically block the build agent, or can it still do other tasks in the background?
No, that's a really good question actually. So the answer is no, it doesn't block the agent. So that particular pipeline is paused, but particularly if you're looking at like the concurrency of pipelines, another pipeline can then continue. So it doesn't block all action on that agent. So the agent is free to pick up another pipeline. So if that one private agent you've got 3 builds going through, for example, has that sort of pause in it for whatever reason, then the other 2 can continue or the next one can continue while it's paused. Okay, so absolutely, it's a good point. And I think actually that didn't used to be the case when it first came out, that concurrency. It did stop it, but yeah, that is certainly the case now. Yeah.
Okay. Since we're killing time, I have some more questions too. In your example, you deployed to Kubernetes using Helm.
Yes.
We currently use kubectl, and we basically push the image into the repo and then deploy the YAML. Yeah. Is the best practice now to use Helm?
No, I don't think so. I think that's just I think that was just an example of how we're seeing, rather, not trying to impose saying this is a best practice. I think that's just we're seeing that as an approach that people take. So whatever works for you, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we'll have an ETA on the Dominoes very soon. As I said, there's people at the back who you can talk to, and there's plenty of drinks, and I'll get you an ETA very soon. Thank you. Talk which will be announced soon. Also, if you want this video, we'll be sharing the video and the slides as well. So thanks.
So we were just talking the break, but just to finish off the conversation, I couldn't find it. The reason was I realised I've got several DevOps organisations, different accounts. I was looking in the wrong one, so that's why I couldn't find the same name in the wrong account. So this is a very simple example. Just very quickly before I start, just finish off the previous conversation. So this is an example where I've got a pipeline that the source is actually somewhere else, in this case GitHub, but it could be any external repository really. And then what I'm doing is saying when this is triggered, so this has got a continuous integration trigger based on when you commit to the external repository, so GitHub in this example, then what happens is, and this one is very simple, but actually I'm then immediately just delegating to Jenkins. And Jenkins is then doing, in this case it's the same one I showed you, but in Jenkins it's a Maven Java build that's taking place, creating the raw file, and when that's complete, I'm then handing over to the release pipeline here. So it's a simple example, but absolutely you can mix and match this stuff. So. Right, so let's do this one. My intent was this is slightly shorter, so I'm conscious of time and probably want to go home at some point, but hopefully it's a little bit shorter than the first one, but we'll cover this off and we'll run through this. So the background to this really, so this one is less about the tools and more about some of our learnings about moving to really a combination of Agile and DevOps. So I put this one up because it wasn't that long ago, probably, so 2010 is when we started our transition to Agile. And so we had our first sprint one. And for most of this applies to most of Microsoft, but the particular examples I'm taking from the team that developed the tools I just showed you. So the Azure DevOps team themselves, so that's the main example. And if you think before this time, certainly from Microsoft's point of view, when we talked about a release, we were pretty much talking about a DVD or a download. And if you're thinking about something like Windows Server or something like that, it would be, there's a release, and we'll see you in 3 years, bye. So there's the DVD, we'll run away and come back again in 3 years, and there's another DVD, kind of thing. So we had to move away from that. Obviously the industry was moving away and has moved away, but it's not that long ago really that was kind of the de facto standard. And so where we've got to now, in fact we're up to sprint 147 or something, is that we've had 147 sprints now since 2010, so we worked to a 3-week sprint, and so we've moved to actually we can release many times within a day, although the headline figure is we do a release every 3 weeks, but actually it's pretty much a release on demand. So I was really just talking about some of the learnings about going from the previous state to where we are now. This one I put in, so I think it's just amusing. So this, I think it was a Google engineer actually who put this together, but this was a kind of as a slightly tongue-in-cheek view of different organisations. Organisational charts. So I feel like Oracle is all legal, a little bit of engineering up there. You've got sort of Facebook, Google, or link to reference networks. Microsoft, we just expanded on that one. Completely separate silos, all pointing a gun at each other. There's a lot of truth in those things. So the world was different back then. So it's about kind of changing that organisation and changing those things. So for us, a key catalyst was Satya. When he came into as the CEO, and really what he's made happen is to say, rather than that previous picture, which is that, and it was definitely the case, that each of the major areas within Microsoft was effectively a separate silo, so Windows, Office, Xbox, Bing, whatever, all of those are dev, all of those would work in their own way, pretty much using the tools they want, in the way they want, and really operated as separate entities. Satya wanted, from an engineering perspective, that, for everyone to work in the same way, ideally using the same tools, so that it was much easier to transition between teams, had commonality, and we all knew that all areas were using the best approaches and the best ways of doing these things. So what's referred to internally as the one engineering system, one ES, and so he wanted everyone to really adopt the best way of working, and internally that is Azure DevOps. So you won't be able to read those at all, but this is adoption over time, this is to August, these dates, and this is the use of Azure DevOps within Microsoft. So we've got to just over 90,000 internal users of Azure DevOps. The difference between the dark blue and the light blue is engineering versus non-engineering. So sort of core team members versus others, really. But so you could probably say we've got about 45,000 engineers that use Azure DevOps. So all of the Microsoft products that you use are managed and released via Azure DevOps, as well as millions of public users of Azure DevOps. So the Azure DevOps tooling is an interesting position now, in that it's the tooling that supports us, it's our tooling, and it's also something we sell to customers. So it's got sort of two purposes. And it has some very challenging clients. So the largest development team in the world is the Windows development team, about 20,000 engineers. It also has the largest Git repository in the world, I can't remember the size now, but enormous. And so they, in order to support that properly in Azure DevOps, we've developed the Git virtual file system, which we contributed back to the community, a way of not having to get everything from the repository because of the size of it. So some changes in Azure DevOps you'll see are driven because of our internal needs inside Microsoft. Some stats, I won't go through them all, lots of numbers, and these are slightly out of date, so they'll be bigger now. But the key one, actually I think is interesting there, is that, so this is our own internal use of Azure DevOps. We do 78,000 deployments a day, so that works out just under 1 a second of our own stuff is being deployed using Azure DevOps, so a lot of that stuff's coming out there. So I guess the question for me is, okay, is this one of those, we recommend you use one of our products, but we secretly don't use it. We're off using something else or doing our own thing. I just want to give you a very quick taste for some of that, which is, if I go back into Azure DevOps, but this time I've gone into the MSN account. I've got read-only access to, this is the project that Azure DevOps itself is maintained in. So we use Azure DevOps to build Azure DevOps. So if I go in there, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but just so you can see to some extent that this is true, I'm not making it up. If I go to the dashboards, take a moment to load, for reasons that will become obvious in a second. There are builds, it's just loading them. There we go. So we can see these are the builds that are currently in progress for Azure DevOps. So that's what's going on at the moment. We can see failures, success, stuff in motion. We can see the releases. I'll talk about things like rings and so on, but we release across rings. We can see CI builds and all that kind of stuff, whatever's going on in there. And we can track into this and see if I look at it from let's look at the plans. Plans is a view across teams. So I've just set up a view here. So these are I think there's 4 or 5 of them. These are the teams that are responsible for all the Agile capabilities within Azure DevOps. And so we're using the plan view. We synchronize the sprints, so they all have the same dates. So we can then look at this and say, well, which team is delivering what feature, and I'll talk about this more, in sprint 147. And we can see what's going on in each of those and set milestones and all that kind of stuff. So all this is being used by our teams in these tools. So again, I can go through that in more detail, but just so you're aware that we are using it. So things I want to go through, I won't really cover infrastructure as a flexible resource because it's really important, but we've kind of covered it in the previous one. I showed you how we can spin up an environment and destroy it afterwards. So we do that a lot internally, but I'll also leave that one. So I want to talk about some of these. They're not purely DevOps, some of these are Agile, some of these are other ideas, but they're just things we've learned, really. So first area is customer focus. And I think the one I wanted to dive into is definition of done. So in previous lives, places I've worked, I'd probably been quite happy if I could just check in my code and maybe it compiles. Actually, that would be pretty good. That's certainly places I've worked, that would be a major step forward. Our definition of done internally, I think, is quite mature, which is that it's not done until it's live in production, and we're collecting telemetry from it, and that telemetry is supporting the hypothesis that drove that release into production. So we know why we're releasing that, and we're measuring it, and we're understanding whether or not we've achieved the objective it's set out to do. So it's kind of this build, measure, learn thing. We believe, in the context of, say, Azure DevOps, it might be, we believe that, we believe that people aren't creating releases because the UI is a bit clunky or something in this area. Therefore, to prove or disprove the above, we will do the following. We will maybe do some A/B testing and provide an updated UI to some users, and we will measure whether or not they create more of those releases or something. And then we'll look at that telemetry, and we'll make our decision that this did or did not help. So that sort of hypothesis-driven development is one of the sort of core areas. Part of this is you need data. So we started off, we developed something called, and to some extent it's still internally called Custo. It's available on Azure as Application Insights, so it's telemetry. Very useful capability, but we learned a few things from that. We need a lot of data. What we found, particularly things like outages, was we didn't know about them, we didn't know they were coming, and when they hit us, we didn't have enough telemetry to tell us what went wrong with the stuff. So we knew we needed more telemetry, we needed to work out where. We also need to measure what people are doing, and so over time we've refined this. So the sort of things that we now treat as particularly important are our end users' usage of the tools, of the solution. So how easy do they find to acquire it, engage with it, what's their satisfaction, churn, how many of the features are being used, that kind of thing, so from the user's perspective. We also care about how quick is it to build and to test and to deploy and to learn stuff. So how quickly can we achieve those things as well? We're also really interested in live site health. So keeping it up and running is probably the number one thing. So there's lots of things we want to know. How quickly can we tell if there are problems? How quickly can we communicate? How quickly can we actually solve the problems, etc. So there's a whole load of things we do care about. I think the controversial ones are some of these, things we no longer care about. So we no longer care what the original estimate was for something. We just care about the impact on the left-hand side. We don't care how many hours or how many lines of code you put into it. None of that is relevant for us at the moment. Interestingly, we've also stopped caring about things like burn down, those sort of areas. We just want to concentrate on these. I think some of that is maturity. It's that actually the teams that have gone through this agile transformation are good enough that actually we just don't need to be putting the metrics on them, rather than that these things are not useful. It's just that actually we don't want to focus on those. Yeah.
Do your teams still estimate, or are there in no estimate space?
No, I think there is estimate, but don't worry too much about backtracking over it and saying actually you originally said it was 15 hours or 3 story points or whatever, and it turned out to be different. Okay. So still estimate because for the planning, but don't worry too much about it in terms of the divergence from the original estimate. That mindset. Yeah. Another sort of approach that's very important around sort of customer focus is feature flags. So we use these really heavily. So I think there's 2 things really about this. One is it really enables progressive deployment and progressive disclosure. So it means that very often when we say there are new features in, for example, Azure DevOps, they haven't just been released. They've probably been released months ago, and you have what you're using, the Azure DevOps service you're using has got that code in there. It's just that today we've turned on the feature flag that says you can see it. So that has helped us a great deal because it means that first of all it's much easier then to do things like A/B testing, and you can give it to a subset of your users and enable it for them. It also means that you're not combining the physical release with the availability of the features. You can let it bed in and make sure that even if it's not being used, that code is not causing issues by being present in the code base. So it's those kind of things help us. It's also probably more from a marketing perspective, the last point here, is that also helps us with what we call dark launches. So that means that we can launch some features but not necessarily make a big fuss about it. We just quietly turn things on. The flip side of that is, which came out of painful real-life experiences, is that some features get turned on in order to support big conferences. So we have things like Build and Ignite, and you get a big exec or someone really interesting and important, so Scott Goo or something like that. And it used to be that literally as they strode on stage towards the laptop, someone was turning on the feature flag. So as they got to it and said, I'm going to show you this, it now exists, and you can now use it. There were a few embarrassing incidents with that, where it turned out there were some unexpected problems, and you don't want to have those discussions about why the exec was then left embarrassed. So what we tend to do, so this is more of a tip for you, is those tend to go live about 24 hours before things like Build and Ignite. So if you just have a quiet look around, you'll see that there are features and things that are enabled, and we just let it bed in and make sure there are none of those weird things, so that as they stride on stage, it's actually at 24 hours. So you can see some of that stuff appearing there. The other thing, just everyone on an everyday level, if particularly things like Azure DevOps, go in the top right hand corner where your picture is, go in there and you'll see you've got control over some feature flags. So you can go and turn on and off features. So there's stuff you can't see, and then there are things you can see and you have control over. And so it also gives you that control. And the way we manage that, actually I was looking into this in a bit more detail, is each team, I'll talk about how we structure it a bit in a minute, each team has a large degree of autonomy over what they decide is a feature and should have a feature flag. Those are then maintained in an XML file for each area, and really it's self-managing in that when that gets too big and complicated, it's time to prune out some of those features. If they've been out and generally available and people are using them, it's time to stop the bigger feature. So that it's now just part of the product. So the idea is to make it pretty much self-managing. Don't let it get too complex, and just have those feature flags you need. Another very important one is production first mindset. I don't expect you to read that. These are screen captures of blog posts. So the key thing is there. So we, like everybody, we have outages. Things go wrong. So first thing is we want to be transparent. So we have a problem. Let's be open about it. You'll find, and these are examples up here, these will then be the root cause analysis of what went wrong, why didn't we anticipate that, and what will we do to make sure it doesn't happen again in the future, really. And so we just need to be open about that. This happened, we need to make sure that doesn't happen again, and here's what we're going to do about it. So the first thing is being open and transparent. Another interesting one is alerting. So clearly you want alerts, you want to know what's going on, but actually we have a major problem with alerts, and the analogy I would make is if you're in an IDE, so like Visual Studio or something, if you turn on all the warnings and then hit build, typically if you point at a random code base, you will have tens of thousands of warnings probably, if you've got lots of code in there. What you'll do is just ignore it, you'll just go blind to it, and go, well, it built fine and it runs fine and unit test pass, so I'll ignore those warnings. And we had a similar problem with alerting, which was there were huge numbers of alerts, and actually people were a bit blind to them. And so what we had to do is go through quite a tricky process of saying that really an alert should be actionable. If we get an alert, we should be worried about it and we should do something about it. We shouldn't just go, oh yeah, we get those. Yeah, we get 1,000 of those every hour. So yeah, that's normal kind of thing. It should be, well, we don't need it, do we? What is the point of that alert? We should get alerts that mean we should spring into action and go, what is going on? Let's do something about it. I don't think it's something we've got right. So talking to the people who are deeply involved in this, I think the impression is it's constantly tweaking the dial now. It's between actually we're just getting slightly too few alerts to tweak it back again, and we're getting too many that we don't care about. But we're sort of hovering around the right area, not necessarily on it, but making sure that the alerts are right, basically. Another interesting one, so here's a scenario. You have a command line or a short script or something, and you put it into a document because you want to be good and document it, you want to be able to share it, so it's not just on your machine or something, and you stick it into Word or OneNote or something like that, and it does funky stuff with quotes. And then somebody else comes along, or even yourself, you copy and paste it back out into a command line or something like that, and then it goes horribly wrong. So it may not work, or worse, it will work, but do something unexpected. So we've had problems like that where actually people have documented it, it's sitting in some kind of document, people are copying and pasting it back out, and it goes really horribly wrong. Stuff is really difficult to understand why this doesn't work. So the lesson we've definitely learned around this is no partial automation. So even if you've got, there's no problem with this, if you've got script fragments, command line, all the rest of it, they can go into your pipeline. Put them in as tasks, run them anyway, but just don't stick them in documents or somewhere else and say at this point, go and do this. So automate it, bring those things in. If you've got a command, stick it into a suitable task like PowerShell or shell script task or something like that. So the other interesting thing is, or potentially is, we use a concept of rings. So in terms of how we deploy, which is separate to the feature flags. So the way we deploy is we want to do progressive deployment. So the idea with this is the first ring, which is our canary users. So these are people who are expecting to get the very latest bleeding edge release. Typically, and mainly, that's our development team. So in the Azure DevOps project, that will be the Azure DevOps team themselves. They will get the first release in ring 0. Obvious reason being, if it goes wrong, first of all, they're going to pick up on that and be personally affected. And secondly, they're in a great place to do something about it. And what we do is we leave it in each ring for 24 hours. So it'll sit in ring 0 for 24 hours, and it will only go into ring 1 afterwards if it's okay for 24 hours in ring 0. Then what we do for Azure DevOps is we say, actually, coming back to the question we had earlier about sort of upgrades, if you like, so every time we do a new release, essentially every sprint, we will then do this order. First of all to ring 0. Second one is we'll take the new version of Azure DevOps and we'll put it in our smallest data center, i.e. those where the least number of people will be affected if there's a problem. And for us, I think that's Brazil at the moment, actually, so we'll go to Brazil. Then, if that's okay, so another 24 hours sitting there. After 24 hours in that one, we'll go to the largest data center, which is one of the US ones. So we'll then see whether scale causes a problem. If that's okay, we'll then go, in fact, we'll go to the furthest away to see if latency causes issues. So that will go to Australia, I'll go to the Australian data center, and then we'll start going around all the rest in order. So it sits there. So the other thing is if you use Azure DevOps, if you look at the release notes, you'll see that on a particular day, it says, we've just released Sprint 148, and it's got these fantastic features in it. And you may look at that and go, I love feature 3, I really need to be using that immediately. If you go to your account and look for it, you may find, and probably will find it's not there. And the reason for that is we release the release notes on day 1 for ring 0, but actually your account is more likely than not is going to be here. So you probably won't get it for 5 days or something. So you'll kind of witness that ring stuff happening because you won't see it immediately. You can request to be moved around these rings actually, by the way, if you particularly want stuff early. Another key tenet for us, this is Azure-wide as well as within the products, but is as well as obviously doing everything we can to prevent security issues, we also assume that we have been breached. So we make the assumption that the bad actors are already inside the system, and we work out what we can do about that. And we also maintain a red team, the blue team, who are constantly working on this. So the red team is trying to gain access to our systems, and the blue team is defending. And so the only sort of provisos around that is that the red team can't touch customer data in any form. It's only got to be Microsoft stuff on Azure. But they use any tactics they can think of. So I know one example I came across was in our sort of cafe areas in Redmond, they put up posters saying you need to go to this URL, and you can win an Xbox, that kind of stuff. So they'll try phishing campaigns internally, whatever, as well as security penetration testing, whatever they can do, they will try and do, and they are bonused on to try and get in there. This is one of those interesting areas where I don't think this is one of those and the blue team always wins stories. I think the red team quite often get in, and that's one of those actually, okay, we've got to learn from that. They found a way in, how do we close that down and make it harder for them next time? So that's just, as it is in the real world, everywhere else, that's an ongoing battle, and those teams are forever battling out over trying to do that, but we have to assume that the bad guys are in there. Around sort of team or organisational structure, that kind of thing. Actually, something that was taken to heart was some of the sort of sentiments in Daniel Pink's Drive. It was a book that was quite big a few years ago. And part of that is how, and this is perhaps most applicable to larger organisations rather than small, but is how do you achieve autonomy for individuals and teams whilst having a large enterprise? And so what we've decided is down at the team level where you do the sprint planning and how you deliver it, where you have autonomy. Above that we have enterprise alignment. And so the point where we sort of split is everyone understands down to what we refer to as a feature. So everybody knows what features are and everybody knows what feature they're working on, and they commit to delivering features by certain dates in sprints and so on. Below that, how you deliver those features as a team is up to you. Are you going to use Scrum? Are you going to use Kanban? Are you going to do something else? How are you organised? Who does what? Enterprise shouldn't care about that. You as a team have agreed you'll deliver those features. How you organise yourselves is up to you. So that's something, sort of an approach we've taken. So we're not just imposing everyone works in this way across a very large organisation. Part of that is we changed the team structure. So as was fairly traditional, we used to have very siloed development and test roles. And so what we did is we got rid of both roles. So testers had their own career path. They probably came from a slightly different background. They had different management, pay levels, banding, all that kind of stuff. Developers different to that. So the first thing we did, which is really part of the Agile adoption, was get rid of the concept of developer and the concept of tester and just have an engineer. And so there are sort of two sides to that coin. One is that I think for a lot of people actually that's a great opportunity. It means that maybe I'm a tester and I can start to do some other stuff. I've got some technical skills and I can maybe grow those. Or I'm a developer and I do have to have, we'll come on to this, more responsibility for quality anyway, so I need to get a bit more involved in other things as well. Equally, the other side of that coin is there are probably people who aren't as comfortable in taking on those sort of cross-functional roles. So we did see people leaving, but we have a new engineer role which surpasses dev and test. And we're now doing the same with the sort of DevOps rollout, where we're approaching the same thing with ops. So the idea there is then the engineering and the ops and the program management team come together as a feature team, and that feature team is then responsible for their features and products to customers. So when, at a simple level, that means when a user story comes in, if you like a feature, a user story, that it's not just looked at by someone like a developer, it's looked at by engineers, but those engineers have different hats on. They're thinking about it from a development perspective, a test perspective, an ops perspective, and so on. So different people can look at that. So that's the journey we're on there. First one, this one is, I think this is less common for a long time in the UK, but certainly in Microsoft in Redmond, in the States this was true, is that this was quite old-fashioned buildings actually, where a lot of people worked in individual cubicles, so literally their own room. So this is an example to me where adopting DevOps actually requires physical building architectural changes. So we've actually redesigned the buildings, got rid of the individual rooms and have physical team rooms. So they're open spaces that a team can work in. This has been a good test today, we should have looked at this. So they're the 2 pizza size team. Never seen me eat a pizza, but that's apparently 10 to 12 people, happy with 2 pizzas. But there we go, so it's 10 to 12 people typically, so classic sort of agile type stuff. Cross-discipline, as I mentioned, self-managing, And the key thing is they own their features, and they own them in production as well. So they own these features through to production, and they own the deployment of those features. Another interesting thing, I think, is how people choose which team they're in. So this is a picture of a sticky note exercise. So the idea here is that every so often, like 12 to 18 months, everyone, basically what happens is the program managers who essentially head up each of those feature teams has the opportunity to say, look, this is what we're going to be working on in the next 18 months. So if it's Azure DevOps, it might be, this is, I head up the Git team, and this is what we're going to be doing around Git for the next 18 months, or this is what we're going to do around Canvas. So they then effectively position what's going to happen, and all the individuals have the opportunity to say, oh, I'd like to work for that team. Actually, that's where I'd like to go, and you can do your like first, second, third place and all that kind of thing. So I think the interesting thing is that actually it's less than 20% of people choose to change. However, I think the key thing there is that everyone has had the choice. So that's not because 80% weren't allowed to, and the managers aren't involved in this process. This is that 80% chose to stay in their teams and 20% chose to move. So it's their opportunity. That seems to work very well. And what that allows is cross-pollination. You get a team that maybe is fairly static, they do some good stuff, somebody moves to another team, and they can take those great practices with them and say, oh, actually, my previous team, they did this, which I think is better. Why don't we try that and do that kind of thing? So it gave us those opportunities to do that cross-pollination. Planning, how do we plan? So we have what we call scenarios, which are 18-month views. So I think this is, for me, this is the being pragmatic. It's that you have to plan. You can't have no plans. So we're going to plan out for the next 18 months what we think we're going to be working on. However, we need to be realistic about that and accept that we probably won't deliver all of that. Stuff changes. So it's 18 months, but we don't expect to deliver all of that. It's just we have to start with that working assumption. We then break it down into seasons. I think they should be not called that because we don't have 2 6-month seasons, but there we go. Anyway, they're called seasons, they're 6-month planning periods, and it's a gradation. So we are more confident that we will deliver this, and we can have greater certainty. That then breaks down into a plan, which is 3 sprints of 3 weeks, and ultimately a sprint of 3 weeks. So by the time you get to the sprint, this is where we're saying we are 100% committed to delivering those features in that sprint. So we should have 100% certainty, with less and less certainty the further we go out. And then this gets reviewed, obviously, but we don't wait 18 months and then do the next 18 months. There's a continuous cycle of let's do a rolling 18-month, 6-month update. So we try and keep that up to date. A couple of things around this. This is around things like retrospectives and so on. So actually, I'll move on to the thing I think is reasonably interesting here is we have a Scrum of Scrum structure. So how do we review that? And actually one of the key things there now is a video. So each team creates a video of what they've produced in that sprint. And then that video is with an email with a summary and the video for people to watch. And that, I think, for us has been a very interesting self-learning process. So there are a few problems to begin with. So they included very high production values. So we ended up with videos that were beautiful, special effects, all sorts of stuff that were on there, very long. So it's now really brutal. It's got, I think it's 5-minute maximum, absolutely no editing whatsoever, no pausing, cutting, coming back after time has passed, nothing like that. And actually the learning again for the teams has been some teams at some point will go, actually, it's a bit unimpressive, isn't it? We work 3 weeks and actually all we've got to show for it is I kind of press that button and, you know, so some teams will kind of self-censor and go, actually, you know what, let's forget this one, we'll carry on with this sprint and do something else. But also I think more positively it gives a focus for, it's a bit like, you know, sitting down and reviewing this with your user. It's that actually we know that we need to be able to demonstrate something useful in a short video, i.e. in real time. So whatever we do has got to happen pretty quickly, it's got to be responsive, and we need to be able to demonstrate that we've done something useful in that time. So it's a focal point for what are we doing in this sprint as well. Lots of experience reviews, sorry I skipped over that, but so we do have We have teams that are responsible for the UX, so they will literally do sort of sitting down, watching people, running video camera on people as they use things, see how they're interacting and understanding the usage pattern as well. Retrospective, something too different about that. Talked about those guys, experience reviews there. Key thing is just feedback, just need to understand from a customer's perspective, how are they finding this? Is it working for them or not? Does the UI work? Does the flow work? All that kind of thing. I think the key thing here actually is, I think if you go back to like 2010 versus now, the big difference is that as an individual in a team, the experience is far, far more enjoyable because you are much more directly connected with your customer. And you're putting stuff out in close to real time. So every 3 weeks you're pushing new stuff out and you're getting that feedback. You're understanding how people are finding that, good or bad. The worst case in the old days was, let's take Visual Studio, the IDE as an example, is we're coming up to the release of the next version of Visual Studio. Someone comes up with a great feature idea. You may be able to implement it in a couple of weeks, but actually you won't be able to deliver it for 3 years because that's the release cycle. So you can work on that. Actually, stuff changes. We have that around things like unit testing frameworks, but by the time we put something in, 2 or 3 years later, the whole landscape has changed. So actually, we adapted to that a different way, but it is really horrible from a team member's point of view, because you're putting stuff in that people won't use for ages, and it might be out of date and wrong, to where we are now, which is we can do stuff, and very quickly, in a few weeks, we know people will be using that. Potentially in most cases. So I think that's also a sort of big plus in terms of engagement. And then the last area I want to talk about is quality. So the whole shift left thing. So do quality as early as possible in the process, particularly when you're looking at things like DevOps pipelines, then that gives you the opportunity at various points to do all sorts of quality assessments. So whether that's unit testing, integration testing, functional load testing, penetration testing, validation of ARM templates, security validation, all sorts of stuff you can do. But what we had to move from was, again, we had very long cycles of releases, and what we ended up with was kind of the anti-pattern of you'd have stabilization sort of periods, I suppose, not sprints at the time, but you'd have points in time where everyone stopped doing everything and were really just trying to fix bugs. And actually it was almost a vicious circle because you had to plan those in. You knew that you would have a long period of time of having to fix bugs, therefore you condense the development time. So what happened was people would put in features knowing they weren't quite complete because I can finish them off in the bug stabilization periods. So it's just really awful sort of setup. So we had to sort that out and really bring technical debt down massively. So the picture before was very lumpy. You go through massive growth of bugs and issues and then have to work really hard on them. Then there'll be a whole batch more of those. And what we've moved to and wanted to have is a much flatter experience. So you're just getting more predictable bugs in terms of numbers that are associated with each sprint, which you can deal with, and then move on to the next one. So you're basically trying to reduce the technical debt. The big way we did that, well actually there's two things before I talk about that. One problem we had was we had a lot of flaky tests. So we may be running like 100,000 tests, but a good number of those would be, well, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, and, that kind of stuff. That one's a bit iffy, don't know whether we trust it kind of thing. So one piece of work, which was not trivial, was resolving that. If a test is needed, it needs to work. And if we don't need it, get rid of it. So there was a big piece of actually really reviewing the tests themselves and not having flaky tests. So the tests are there and working. And then the other piece was this, which was how do we, in particular to try and drive both quality and time, make things quicker, how do we move away from where we were, which was a vast dependence on what we call level 3 tests. So those where we require the entire system to be up and running in order to test it. So we need to deploy it and have it running in order to do it. How do we move from that pattern to more of a pattern where we can do more and more of this testing at a unit test level, just using binaries, and do less and less requiring the full system. So we did that, I don't expect you to read that again. So this is over a period of, I think that's about 18 months or so. The key thing here is the orange bars are the level 3 tests, where you need the full environment. And the blue bars, which were up here, are the level 1 tests. Level 0 tests. So over, it took us a long time, but over a long time with a lot of effort, we've turned that around. So we said actually that's switched over, so that actually the majority of our testing is now level 0, with some stuff there. So in other words, we're doing the majority of our testing we're doing within builds, and within CI builds and that kind of thing, or automated builds overnight. So that was another sort of significant change. Yeah, that's fine. We also, just general point, but we completely use pull requests, so we use Git almost exclusively internally. And pull requests are the standard way of managing those. So we have build policies around the branches and make sure that they not only the human code review aspect, but also any policies that you want to enforce, like work item association and running builds and passing tests and all that kind of thing as well. So the pull request flow is the key thing there. And then, as I said, the last area, which I'll just quickly cover off again, because we talked about it before, is we make a heavy use of infrastructure as flexible resource, so infrastructure as code internally as well. So don't have environments hanging around when they don't need to be. The example I used earlier, like the test environment, blow it away, recreate it when you need it, use that approach. Obviously that's not going to be applicable to production and stuff like that, but there are a lot of environments when you can take that approach. So those key things, the other one I wanted to chuck in. This is something, I know, actually I'll do a show of hands, so I think people have different views on this. Who likes the term DevSecOps, if you've come across it? Okay, I'm with, okay, a couple of, I'm sort of with you if you're not raising your hand. The reason I don't like it is, I don't know when you stop, so I think it's very, very valid, but I don't know whether it should be dev, plan, test, release, SecOps or something. So I just don't know when you stop saying what you should be doing as part of DevOps. So I think it should be implicit, but I think the sense of DevSecOps, which I totally agree with, but maybe I don't like the word, but is that you must not forget security. So you mustn't forget other things as well, like testing and things. But it is important. If you're applying any security principles today without using DevOps, then you just directly apply them inside DevOps. In the pipeline, take whatever it is you're doing, you're running scripts or whatever it is you're integrating with other products, static analysis tools, things like that, just make sure that's in your pipeline as well. And it can go in at various points. It could be in the build, it could be in the release, it could be in both. There are tools to help as well. So we have something called AZSK, the Azure Security Toolkit, and that provides, it's a mixture actually of processes, scripts and tasks. But for example, some of the things it gives you is some tasks that will do security validation of your ARM templates. So before you try and deploy them, it can validate whether or not they are secure. Whether they expose various problems in there. So the reason I put it in is just make sure you include that in things like your release pipelines as well. Whatever it is you want to do, make sure it's automated and it's in there as well. Mentioned this already, so I won't repeat it again. The slides are there, I'll stick it on the slide. There's a challenge, just in case I forgot, but I'll put those up there. So, quick summary, there's loads more information under there, but if you're interested in those, actually, I should have put a link up there, but there is, I might upload the slides to stick it in there, but we've actually got a microsite, I suppose, which is around our own learnings. There are interviews with some of the engineering leads about some of their experiences and some white papers and stuff like that. So if you want to know more about this, then it's something we're being open about as well, how we've transitioned, what problems we've had to solve. So just you have a search for it, and it's, if you go to azure.com/devops, you can find the links off there. But hopefully that's useful to say. These, I don't see those as dogmatic. They're not things that I'm saying you need to do, just saying those are things that we've learnt. And I think the key for me is that adopting both Agile and DevOps, as we know, but is more than just the tooling. You need to think about how you work, your organisation, how you're structured, all of those kind of sides to it is just as important, and sits alongside that. So Thank you very much for your time. Hope that's useful. I'm happy to stay on for questions. I appreciate it's getting late into the evening. But yeah, far away, or I'll stay on if you want to head off.
Can you zoom into the URL, please?
Yeah, there we go. And the other one's DevOps one for the previous slides. My cunning naming convention, I would say. So yeah, any questions before we break? Otherwise, I say if I'm happy to stay around if people want to just shoot off. But apparently else, thank you for your time and attention. I hope that's useful. Just wait until cameras aren't there. If I just come out of that as well, feel free to contact me as well. So giles.davies@microsoft.com. If there's anything I can help with, very happy to do so. Particularly around this year and all that kind of stuff. That is my day job. So very happy to help out with that. So feel free to get in touch. But thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks for listening.